Thank you very much, everybody. My background is not quantum physics, so I'm not going to stand here and preach quantum physics to the experts. My background is in security and business, and that's the context that I'd like to give the talk in today. So ID Quantique is a company founded as a spin-off of the University of Geneva, the group of applied physics of Professor Nicolas Gisin, and we work with photons. I look after the random number generator and the quantum safe security division, and I'll explain a bit what I mean by that. The company's been around since 2000, and is working in Finland with our partner Cygate. The context, first I'll explain the context that we're working on in the world of encryption, and then I will explain how quantum cryptography, or more correctly known quantum key distribution, provides a solution. First of all, data storage is cheap. It costs nothing now to store data. And the governments are curious. You've all seen these allegations or revelations by Snowden that the NSA is collecting millions of phone records daily. This is a particularly interesting map. This explains where optical intercepts were put. There is one particular optical intercept at Bude in Cornwall, at the entrance of the transatlantic optical fibers, where the governments were downloading and storing the information of 210 gigabit optical fibers every single second. That's 210 gigabit per second information. You can imagine how much that is. So volume and storage is no longer a limitation. Why does this matter? Because everything you transmit is now being downloaded and stored for future brute force attacks. You say, fortunately critical data is encrypted, you would hope. But there is a threat, quantum computers. Now, as Colin pointed out, the D-Wave machine doesn't do Shor's algorithm, but there will be cryptographically relevant quantum computers, and the estimation that we have from different quantum communities is that there will be a cryptographically relevant quantum computer available in 2030. We, of course, know that the NSA is working on this very hard. They have, again, a Snowden revelation, a program called Penetrating Hard Targets worth $70 million that they're investing in. The Chinese are investing in 90 different quantum projects. The Russians, similarly, Google, of course, is now doing it. So quantum computing is a very active field. And the implications for cryptography are very serious. I'm going to delve into two types of cryptography that you need to know about if you're understanding where quantum key distribution is used. The first is secret key cryptography. This is essentially, in the world of cryptography, we talk about Alice and Bob. Alice wants to send a message to Bob. Alice takes a message, she encrypts it with a secret key. The ciphertext is then passed along an internet. This could be you sending payment information to your bank about a transfer you want to do. It could be the entire military information passing between two data centers for a country. It could be financial information where accessing that financial information milliseconds before your competitors gives you a very key advantage on the stock exchange. It could be any information, but it's critical information. Bob uses the same key to decrypt it. Now, this is symmetric key encryption, which uses algorithms like, in the past, DES, which is no longer considered secure. Nowadays, typically AES, and of course, the ultimate holy grail would be Vernon's cipher, one-time pad. Security relies on keeping the key secret. Why? Because both keys are the same. The key for encryption and decryption is the same, and the theory is the more often you change the key, the more secure it is. So the fundamental part of any cryptographic protocol is the key. You have to assume that the algorithm, like AES, is known and widely studied. Now the question is, if your two keys are secret, how do you actually exchange them? How do you get that key, that AES symmetric key from Alice to Bob? And this was revolutionized, of course, by Diffie and Hellman, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman in the 1970s. And the invention was called public key cryptography, or asymmetric cryptography, where you use two separate keys, two different keys. One is a public key, which is used to encrypt the information, and one is a private key, which is used to decrypt it. So now if we look at the analogy, if Alice wants to send information to Bob, she takes Bob's public key, which is available on the internet, and she sends the information, she encrypts the information from using Bob's public key and sends it to Bob. And Bob only has his private key and he can decrypt it. But he's the only one who has the private key. And this is a similar principle which is used throughout public key cryptography, whether it's Diffie-Hellman, RSA, elliptic curve, these mathematical one-way functions. The principle is it's easy to multiply two prime numbers together, but it's difficult to factor in the opposite direction, unless, of course, you were listening carefully to Colin's talk. That may be becoming easier. Now, this is the public key, which is used to encrypt the information, and Bob has access to the private key. This is based on the principle of where one-way, the mathematical one-way functions are based on certain principles or assumptions about limitations of computational power in the universe. And the security depends on the difficulty, in this case, of factoring large prime numbers. But it's very vulnerable to progress in maths and technology. And the most famous one, of course, that we all know about is Shor's algorithm. There is an existing quantum algorithm which is used for quantum, basically for integer factorization, which is known to be able to break RSA, elliptic curve, Diffie-Hellman. These are the most commonly used public key algorithms that encrypt everything that you have ever cared about, that your country has ever cared about, etc. So this is a very, very fundamental problem that needs to be addressed. Now, if we put this in terms of computational complexity in cryptography, you can see that with computing time compared to the key length, the longer the key, the longer it takes to encrypt and decrypt. Unless, of course, you don't have the key, in which case decryption without having the relevant key should be exponentially difficult. Until you think about theoretical progress like Moore's law, parallel computing, improvements in factorization. And in fact, the original RSA challenge in 1979 was posed in Scientific American, was that Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman believed that a 428-bit key would remain secure for 40 quadrillion years. And the message, if any of you remember, is the magic words are squeamish ossifrage, which is pretty difficult to do cryptanalysis on because it doesn't use any of your typical E's, I's, etc., or things that you commonly find if you're using a statistical cryptanalysis. It was factored in 3 months in 1994. And when I asked, I had the pleasure of meeting R.S. Anday at one of the RSA conferences, and they said that they had taken into account Moore's law, but they hadn't taken into account parallel computing. And what you can see here is that subsequently, all of these RSA keys have been factored since then. RSA 1024 bits is no longer considered secure. RSA 2048 bits is the minimum amount. But basically, this is a creaking system which will become irrelevant or vulnerable once a quantum computer becomes a reality. A quantum computer that can factor numbers of this length. And what you can see here is that with a classical computer, the key length is exponential, but with a quantum computer, you can increase the key length till you're blue in the face, but it becomes a polynomial problem. It's a problem which can be solved in polynomial time. So it is no longer secure to use this cryptography. So what's the answer? The European Telecommunication Standard Institute published a paper calling for quantum-safe cryptography. This was in 2014, and they very correctly, I cannot find a better way of phrasing it than this. Without quantum-safe encryption, everything we have ever transmitted over a network, or will ever transmit over a network, is vulnerable. Because of course what governments are doing is they're downloading information now, and when a quantum computer comes along, they will be able to decrypt that. Now, if that's information which has transient value, that is not a problem. But what if it's it's information with a value of 10 years? That means that if a quantum computer is available in 2030, you need to be quantum safe in 2020. What if it's your DNA information that can be used against you and your children? What if it's military information that should be kept secure 50 years? So this is a real problem. And the question is now, what do we do about key exchange? Do we use RSA and elliptic curve and Diffie-Hellman, or do we go back to a kind of manual key exchange? This is what they used in the time of the ancient Greeks. They would put a code on the head of somebody, they would tattoo it, they'd wait till the hair grew, and then they'd send that messenger into enemy lines, and as soon as he arrived, they would shave the head. There were quite a few casualties, but, you know, people were more expendable then. So what do we do about key exchange now? How do we get the AES key from Alice to Bob? How do we actually make that key exchange in a cryptographically insecure world with a quantum computer? The answer, of course, is quantum key distribution. This is how we explain it to people who are not quantum physicists. It's like classical crypto is like writing a code on a tennis ball. You can capture the ball, read the code, send it on, and nobody would know. And quantum key distribution is like writing the code on a soap bubble. You try to capture the soap bubble, but you perturb it in the process. Quantum mechanics, in the process of observing it, you introduce a perturbation. You force the eavesdropper, Eve, to introduce errors into the equation. Now, of course, we don't use soap bubbles and tennis balls. We're talking here about the millions of photons that pass along optical fibers, or a single photon that has quantum properties. And we use the single photons to transfer a code from Alice to Bob in a form of key exchange, so that you end up with highly secure key material on both Alice and Bob's side. It's perfectly synchronized, provably secure key exchange. And the principle that is used, and Professor Ilkka Tittonen promised to help me out if you had any really tough questions on this, but is the most commonly known one is the BB84 Protocol by Brassard and Bennett in 1984. And basically, you need to know two things. There's a bit stream, and there are bases. Alice prepares a number of bases. These are randomly chosen by a random number generator. And Bob also chooses the basis at random. And each of them, after the exchange of the bit stream, compare what bases have been used. Because these are random, they'll only agree a certain percentage of the time, and they then only use those bits which have been transmitted and passed through the correct basis, where they both agree on the basis. Now, the basis you can use can be polarization. We actually use the phase of light in our solutions. You then pass this through compatibility, you check out the compatibility, and you extract a key from this. This is then passed through an error correction and a privacy amplification protocol. So that by the end of the key exchange, you have a much reduced key, but with 100%, I say in inverted commas 100% in security. There's never perfect security. But this is provable security. In this case, you know exactly how much information Eve, the eavesdropper, has been able to capture. And so you have a provable security as to your level of security. And the goal here is there's a couple of rules of the game. First of all, the details of the protocol have to be publicly known. It can be BB84, it can be decoy state, it can be coherent one-way, which is one of the new protocols we're working on. The second is that the goal is to produce either a completely provably secret key or nothing at all. And if it's nothing at all, the assumption is that the eavesdropper might as well just cut the optical fiber. And the third principle, and this is based on an error correction and privacy amplification, where if it provides a certain amount of information that is accessible to Eve, then you simply do not use that key. But if you have a key and you use it, you are certain that it is secure, that it has not been eavesdropped. Now, when we started out in 2000, this is what the device looked like. This is what our CEO, Grégoire Ribordy, was doing in the University of Geneva. We wanted to commercialize it, so we took a system approach. And basically, you need to have a single photon source. Because we use common off-the-shelf products, components for cost requirements. We use actually a laser source, which we attenuate so that there's a probability you get a single photon, and you use a quantum random number generator to choose your bases randomly. On the other side, you have a single photon analyzer and detector. That's basically the essence of what a quantum key distribution system looks like, with a lot of engineering around it. This is what the solution looks like since 2007. Basically, you have your quantum key server, which is generating keys and then detecting the keys on the Bob side, and you link it into encryptors. where is this used? It's basically used in data center communications. So you have your key servers exchanging keys, probably on a dark fiber, because you don't want, there's of course crosstalk with the very, very bright data on the optical fiber, although we have solutions where we multiplex the quantum key along with the data. And you then link it into the encryptors that encrypt the data using the AES keys. The first ever public announcement or implementation, commercial implementation, should I say, which is known about, of quantum key distribution was done by us in Geneva, where we basically secured the link between the central vote counting station and the Geneva government data center. The Swiss vote quite a lot, and this is used very regularly since 2007. This is also a typical example. This is an interconnect between two data centers in a bank. Now, banks back up everything. They back up your credit history, your credit card information, your personal data, data about, if it's a national bank, it could be about the GDP of your country. But they're obliged by law to back it up, and they're obliged by law to back it up in a place which is separate. So if there's a flood at the headquarters, you're in a different geographical location 80 kilometers away, and there's a probability that that data will be secured. So this is a scenario where we have quantum key distribution protecting the data between the bank headquarters and the data center. It's 18 kilometers with 18 dB of attenuation on the fiber. The data throughput is 2 times 10 gigabits per second, so it's quite a high throughput. And the distilled key that we receive on either end is 2 times 2, the minimum key that we receive is 2 times 256 bits, because that is the size of an AES key. That is what we need in order to generate an AES key every single minute to be able to encrypt that data. And if you look at it, of course, if you get closer, you can have a higher, you can have more bits per second. The attenuation of the fiber plays quite a lot on the single photon. So the smaller the distance, the higher the bit rate of the key that you're able to generate in either side. And actually, we have a new protocol where we've just made the world record in the University of Geneva of 305 kilometers with no amplifiers in between, clearly. What does next generation quantum crypto look like? We have limitations in the distance. The limitation is obviously by the fact that even if you're using dark fiber, you have attenuation introduced by the optical fiber itself. So the longer the distance, the less the probability that you have enough photons arriving to be able to make up the secret key. You cannot use standard network amplifiers because you lose the quantum coherence. They believe it's an interception attempt. So you have a natural limitation on the distance. Of course, you're also linked to optical fibers or any kind of optical medium. So the next generation solution, and it's a point-to-point technology, which means you can only link 2 points. So the next generation is what's called a trusted node. And this is something which has now become common parlance in the world of QKD, quantum key distribution. You basically take a quantum blade that we now have, so it's reduced into a standard network rack device that you can put into something called an ATCA blade. This is standard networks equipment that you find, when you're sending any internet information, etc. This is the standard equipment that all pass through. So you now have a quantum key server in a rackable blade, and what you can do is simply daisy chain them together to overcome the distance problem. So you have point-to-point links, but all linked together. And the way that this works is this is actually a project, a publicly financed project called the CCOC architecture, where Switzerland worked with multiple other countries, where you elaborated 3 different layers. One is the QKD plane, which is essentially a series of point-to-point links. You've got your key servers, and then you have your encryption services. And what this does is it virtualizes the key exchange so that distance no longer becomes an issue. You have your trusted node below, and your key exchange is done seamlessly between Alice, Bob, Charlie, Daisy, however many people you want. So you overcome distance, and you can now have it in a multi-point environment between multiple endpoints. The big thing in the world of quantum key distribution is building these trusted nodes. We're working with an American partner, Battelle, to build one from the east to west coast of the States. China has launched a very significant effort to build one from Beijing to Shanghai. There are 32 trusted relay nodes, as they call them, trustable relay nodes, which is the same thing. And with metropolitan area networks here. Japan is working on it too. South Korea is working on one. You heard earlier, the UK is spending £270 million on quantum developments, and they are building also these trusted node networks between Oxford, Bristol, Cambridge, York. We're working in Switzerland to build one, and Finland. This is a public challenge to everybody in this room. We would love to work with you to build a trusted node network between Aalto, for example, and Uvascular, among others. But this is a stepping stone to the point at which you have a quantum repeater, which is essentially a mini quantum memory that will be able to take a photon and retransmit it through entanglement without losing the quantum coherence. And those I see as the next network equipment, probably not in the next 5 years. And of course, there's free space optical, where this is the next stage in technology challenges, which is to transmit an optical a photon between a ground station and a drone, or a ground station and a satellite. There's been studies by ESA saying that there is no inherent technology limitation. The main challenges, of course, are on the engineering side, how you actually track what quantum channel you use. Do you use continuous variables? Is a prepare and measure single photon the correct channel to use? Or what's the optimal quantum channel? But basically, the essential challenge here is how you send the photon stream and how you receive it. When it's stable and you're building to building, it's okay. But imagine that your drone is above Helsinki in the lovely Finnish wind that I flew in through yesterday, and that your tracking device is moving. How do you actually track the single photons in that case? So essentially, this is now moving into an engineering challenge, one that we hope to take up at ID Quantique. Maybe just the last point that I'd like to say is that we also every year run a winter school in Geneva. It's up in the Swiss Alps, so it's a very nice, and we have some time for discussing quantum physics on the ski slopes. But in 2015, we had Professor Gizang talking about quantum repeaters. We had the joy of Colin from D-Wave coming to talk as well, and other notable people in the world of quantum computing. So I would invite you, if you're interested in this in more detail, to think about our winter school in 2016. And that's all I wanted to say. I don't know if there are any questions.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, comments or questions? Yes.
Your company is selling random number generator which operate, if I remember correctly, that something like 1 megabit per second, right? Now, Intel suggests also random number generators incorporated already into the processor, and they claim that it is something like already gigabit per second. Can you comment on this Intel production?
So we provide quantum-based random number generators, which are random number generators based, where we harness the randomness of quantum physics to generate truly random numbers. It's very, very difficult to generate true randomness. You can't take a deterministic computer code and try to generate randomness from it. You need external elements. The devices sold by IDQ are anything from 4 to 16 megs. We sell them in gaming and security applications. We can build higher throughput, but we've never seen the requirement for it, because what do you do with all that randomness? Normally randomness is stored offline in the security world or in the gaming world. So that's, in our view, not the challenge. There would be something I'd say is that in the world of security, that is another revelation by Snowden, is you need to look very, very carefully at the source of the entropy. Because one easy way of overcoming encryption is not to attack the algorithm, but to attack the source of the randomness. And our our engineering team and researchers actually participated in an attack on Intel chips. It's not the latest Intel chip, but where we were able to introduce a Trojan horse, and by doping some of the hardware Intel chips producing the randomness for most of the computers, we were able to stick the gates closed. And we reduced the Intel chips without any visible proof from 128 bits of entropy, which is secure, to 32 bits of entropy, which is not secure. So if you're interested, I can happily send you paper on that. I'm not saying the latest Intel chips would be subject to similar attacks, but I'm just saying know your entropy. And you should use multiple sources. If you have very serious security requirements, do not use one source of entropy, even from us.
Other questions or comments?
Yes.
Can you gain useful information by listening in between two devices in a quantum chain that you're talking about? So if you have a quantum secure link between my source and one step in between and the other.
You mean at the trusted node? So the answer is you have to be able to access the node. Until you get to the point where you have a quantum repeater, which keeps the quantum coherence based on entanglement, then you will not be able to listen in. It will have a kind of anti-eavesdropping in itself. In today's trusted nodes, you have a quantum protection, another quantum protection, but the protection at the center where you're exchanging that information is classical. And you're absolutely correct. That is a potential vulnerability. And that's why, for example, if you have a trusted node, it needs to be physically protected in a physically secure environment, in a physically trusted space. And that's where you get companies like Battelle who do anti-tamper proofing as their life. You wouldn't have it in an open space in a node because you have the classical challenges in between. That's a very good point, exactly.
All right, there's another question there.
Hi. Inside your apparatus, do you have to source your computational elements from a secure foundry, or are you able to use off-the-shelf stuff?
That's a very good question, and that's so we test, in our solutions, we test every single one of the elements. There will be a next generation of device-independent QKD, which is under development, where the theoretical principle is that you wouldn't have to trust any of the elements. You just have to check whether it was in quantum regime or not. But until you get to the point of device-independent QKD, which is probably you have to have pretty good components in a very theoretically perfect environment. So that's not something we'll see in a commercial environment anytime in the next 5 to 10 years, we believe. Until then, we are working on quantum certification schemes. And that's exactly that. How do you trust the supply chain? How do you check that all of the devices, the detectors are working in the way they should? And that is work which is being undertaken also by ETSI on how you standardize the quality of the detectors, everything. So then it becomes like a standard security device used by any government or any commercial environment. It would have to be certified according to a set of common criteria standards.
Thank you.
All right, the last question.
Hang on.
We can do it over the drinks later.
Yeah,
if.
Sure. So what kind of market do you envision for quantum key distribution, let's say within 10 years?
I'd say the verticals that are most open to using it are the finance sector, because they have very secure information to relay with long-term. You need to have a market which cares about security and which cares about which has long-term data. In other words, they care about how they transmit the data and whether it'll be broken, within 2 years by an offline, in an offline environment. So those markets are financial, government, and healthcare. Unfortunately, healthcare has no money, so they've never bought anything from us, which I think is a major problem, because if you think about the information that you personally want most secured, it's your DNA information, it's going to be, your understanding more about how your brain functions. All of that will affect not just you, but every single descendant you ever have. So that is information that has real long-term sensitivity. Your biometric information in your biometric passport, for example, all of that should be secured using quantum safe methods. So financial, government, financial, government, healthcare are the ones we mostly see.
Okay, so if you would need to put a number, 2025, what would be your guess?
I can give you Gartner numbers, which tells you that we're in a $60 billion market. The question is how much of that you can gain. I believe that in the next year, in the next 10 years, all of cryptography will have to be quantum safe. And there are 3 options to doing it. Manual key exchange, the code on the head, among others, USB keys, etc. The second one is QKD, quantum key distribution, based on physical principles, which is provably secure. And there will also be another generation of what are called post-quantum or quantum-resistant algorithms, which are not elliptic curve, which are not susceptible to Shor's algorithm, but which are not provably secure against any as yet unknown quantum algorithm. So the quantum-resistant algorithms, which will be a next generation of RSA and elliptic curve, are suitable for small amounts of data without a very, very long-term value. But I think there will be those 3 layers of encryption.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so thank you, Kelly.
Thank you very much indeed.